presented by NDMD Productions and made possible by Get Up Productions. I am your host, Andy, senior year medical student now, and here we continue the mission of the NDMD YouTube channel by sharing impactful stories from students, residents, and attendings of all different kinds of medical professions while giving you an inside look into their lives, not just as healthcare workers, but as the incredible people they are as well. But this series is all about the things all those years of medical training doesn't prepare you for, things that are beyond the scope of our practice. So with that being said, let's introduce today's guest. And so I've mentioned multiple times on this channel that it is truly never too late to decide to go to medical school. My path was the obvious exception to this rule, as I was quite literally contractually pulled away from the decision to take any gap years before med school, which I think makes it even more rewarding to bring on stories from people who not only took the time before medical school to learn more about themselves, but also pursue entirely different careers that are just as integral to their story as a physician as any medical school experience. Some people work as MAs or medical assistants, nurses have careers in the military as like field medics, or go the complete opposite route and leave stable corporate jobs before deciding to make the commitment to go to medical school. Today's guest made the transition as a pharmacist, going from PharmD to medical school, and has since built up a stellar career within medical school to help other applicants of similar educational backgrounds navigate the process to and through med school. And so with that being said, I am very much looking forward to hearing about your unique experiences. Welcome to the show, Nathan. How are you?
Hey, Andy, thanks so much for having me on today. This is a great opportunity to share a lot of different knowledge, especially from like myself, a non-traditional medical school applicant. So I'm just excited to be here, and I'm doing great today.
And I appreciate you, one, reaching out. You have an incredible story. And I know we were joking before we started recording that you reached out at the beginning of 2022. And that was when I was beginning my clinical rotations, which, as you know, as a fellow medical student, is a very busy time. And then, for you to reach out again, almost quite literally a year to the dot, just is a testament to your persistence. That will
Thank you.
take you very, very far.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah.
But Frill, thank you so much for taking the time to be here and to share your unique stories, as I'm sure there are more people than I would imagine that are in a similar position. But before we get into it, in case I missed anything in the intro, can you briefly introduce where you're from, what school you go to, what specifically led you to pharmacy, but then also what led you to decide to pursue a career going to medical school?
Alrighty, so there's definitely a lot to unpack there. So I'm originally from Rochester, New York. So that's upstate New York for those of you who aren't too familiar. And I ended up going to pharmacy school down in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So a little bit bigger of a city. And I ended up doing a 2+4 program. So that's 2 years of undergrad and then 4 years of like graduate level education. And the university I went to was called Duquesne University. It's a little bit smaller, but it's a very good program. And I had a great time down there in Pittsburgh. So partly, through my pharmacy education, I kind of decided that, I was interested in exploring a little bit more with medicine. Pharmacy has a pretty, I guess, obviously strong background in medication management and care optimization. But as we transition into those more clinical aspects of our education process, I kind of took an interest in like the diagnostic approach, and I wanted to be a little more hands-on than what pharmacy was offering at that particular time. And so I ended up, reaching out to a couple individuals who actually went to pharmacy school and then medical school, and they served as basically my mentors throughout this process. So I wasn't the first to do it. I certainly won't be the last, but they pretty much helped facilitate that process and kind of, gave me the appropriate resources, or I guess direction that helped a non-traditional applicant, apply to medical school and do all the right, I guess, things, quote unquote, to get in, because unlike some maybe traditional applicants, we don't have as many resources available to us, or, we might not even know where to look in the first place. So I, about halfway through pharmacy school, I decided, maybe I'll take the MCAT and see where I go with that. First attempt didn't go too well, but second attempt was a big improvement. Then I ended up applying to medical school after that period of time. So basically, in my final year of pharmacy school, I was on clinical rotations, just like medical school is. And I was going to interviews and doing all those things. And I ended up matriculating at Jacobs School of Medicine, which is University of Buffalo. So a little triangle action from Rochester to Pittsburgh back up to Buffalo. So I'm currently, a rising fourth year at the moment. So yeah, it's been a magical experience to say the least, and it's been very rewarding.
That's so interesting. You mentioned the 2+4 because I didn't know that, and you know, from me, I was in a like I guess a 3+4 program for medical school, and I believe University of Georgia has just now made a similar program for their pharmacy school actually, and that was my first time knowing that an accelerated program existed for pharmacy. So just out of curiosity, were you then accepted to pharmacy school from high school, like conditionally?
Yeah, so it was pretty much like a policy where if you maintained a certain GPA, you took like the PCAT, which is like the pharmacy entrance exam. I don't know if they even utilize it anymore. It's something that they've kind of gotten away from. And then a bunch of other, random things like letters and so on. And then you obviously had to interview for the pharmacy program. But yeah, so basically, if I did all those things, then they pretty much reserved a spot for me in the pharmacy program. So it was a pretty nice transition, actually, between like undergrad, and they kind of packed in as much information into those first 2 years. The downside is that, I didn't get a bachelor's degree or anything like that, which was somewhat of an issue when applying to medical school. But because some programs, are pretty strict on you need a bachelor's degree, but I was like, no, I have a PharmD. But so communicating that was a challenge at one point in time. But yeah, so it was then 4 years of pharmacy school.
That's so interesting because obviously there's a ton of parallels between my program and yours. That conditional acceptance, barring you get your whatever score on entrance exam. I'm sure you have to maintain a certain GPA, interviews, service hours, etc. But I had at the very least finished with a bachelor's degree. I think they dual counted some of my first semester medical school credits to finish out my bachelor's of science to the point where I got my white coat before I had an undergraduate commencement ceremony, which is like kind of interesting, especially in the family realm where they were like, "You should go to your undergraduate commencement." I'm just like, I had a white coat ceremony before this. Like, this is uh, it just feels odd to almost celebrate backwards. But I did not know that you don't even have a bachelor's from that program.
No, no, I just graduated with my PharmD. They offered a couple extra courses here and there that you pay a little bit extra for to, of course, finish out those degrees. I'm pretty close on credits, but I figured this was enough, and medical school would be, also fitting.
Yeah, that's just an interesting route that I didn't know existed. Um, and so I actually did a 73 question interview with a clinical pharmacist who works at our medical school. But out of just pure curiosity, what did kind of a day in the life of pharmacy school look like, really briefly?
Yeah, yeah. Not to get too far in the weeds, but to break it down, pretty much each year is a little bit different with what you learn. So your first, PY1 year is basically just all basic pharmacology, very dry pharmacokinetics, like really in depth, like biochemical stuff. Second year is really clinical, a lot of pathology, introducing disease states. And then third year is more so just like refining that material and kind of taking it to the next level with like higher level courses, critically ill, therapeutics, and so on. And then fourth year is just like clinical rotations, just like we're doing in medical school. And so the day in the life, those first 3 years of didactic work was pretty strenuous to say the least. I talk a lot about, the comparisons between pharmacy school and medical school. And you'd be surprised. There's actually they're very similar when it comes to like the rigor. So, I have a lot of respect for my pharmacy peers, and it's no joke getting through pharmacy school. Medical school has a little bit more volume, I think. It's more of a broader net that you cast with how many different diseases that you have to be familiar with, like all those, random zebra diseases that you'll never see in real life. But versus pharmacy, you really learn like the first, second, third line, medications for one particular disease state, like hypertension or something along those lines. So maybe a narrower focus, but more in depth with the material. So yeah, it's pretty. I'd say rotations have been a little bit harder with medical school, just because the hours are a little bit longer. We have shelf exams intertwined versus in pharmacy school. Basically, we had one final, licensure exam at the end of everything and a bunch of, random essays and assignments to do, but there weren't any, shelf exams to worry about. So I think rotations were a little more lax for me personally, but pharmacy school was tough. I won't, deny anyone that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And even my time as a medical student on rounds, and I'm sure you've interacted with them too. I mean, clinical pharmacists are like literally the safety net for a lot of, especially like the new residents, the interns that come up, and like the amount of times, especially on my pediatrics rotation, the pharmacist be like, "Hey, no, not this drug," like in the back as the residents presenting, and they're just like, by the look of the pharmacist in the corner, I probably should change my plan for management. They
Literally.
are truly an integral part of the team. Um, and I think like kind of bringing up the clinical pharmacy side, I know there is technically like a match process too.
Correct.
Pharmacy, somewhat similar to the med school and like physician match process. Uh, Before you like decided to go to medical school, I know you were saying like you were a little bit more interested in the diagnostic side. Were there any specialties within pharmacy that you considered? You're like, okay, maybe this might also, scratch that itch without making me have to do a whole another 4 years plus residency.
Yeah, there was definitely a point in time where I was, very convinced on doing like a pharmacy residency and becoming a clinical pharmacist, like the individual you were just mentioning. And part of the reason, I guess, why I didn't go through with it was partly because I would have had to have done residency training. And so, that's not just 1 year, but if you want to further specialize into like transplant or something along those lines, you have to do an extra year. So, it's only 2 years of residency, but that's 2 long years of, something that I wasn't 100% sold on doing. So I don't know if there was necessarily a good match for like diagnostic component because it's not really, in the pharmacy purview per se. There is some, pharmacy prescriptive authority in some states. And I know if you work in like the VA, they have some privileges there as well. That kind of allows you to use more of a diagnostic approach. But to my knowledge at the time when I was looking into it, I was kind of really sold that like med school was the pathway. I started with the residency idea, but then I kind of transitioned away from it, as I progressed through school.
Gotcha. And so, judging by how the story is going, you didn't spend any time as having a full-on career as a practicing pharmacist.
No, so I ended up matriculate. So I ended up taking my last pharmacy licensure board, and I live in New York State, so there were three boards that you had to take. Um, and so I ended up taking the last board on the first day of medical school. I ended up missing the first day because I had to, sit for this board. So literally no break whatsoever. And to be fair, though, I have been a practicing pharmacist, so I do work throughout medical school on the side and on weekends. So during the didactic portion, it was a lot easier. Now it's pretty much impossible with the hours on rotations, but we still squeeze in a shift here and there.
Gotcha. So you got your moonlighting experience early in med school.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pretty nice because I can still kind of stay connected with the pharmacy world while also keeping like some of that pharmacy knowledge sharp. So it's definitely helped. Definitely, it's stressful as well because I'm like managing a pharmacy now and I have like responsibilities and I'm in charge of, individuals. And so it's very different, compared to like, and then I switch roles and wake up the next morning, go to class and the whole dynamic shifts dramatically. So it's, an interesting experience to say the least.
Gotcha. Now, I'm curious. Of course, like you had that little taste of, working as a pharmacist. Was it a tough decision for you, especially when you were kind of mulling over your mind? All right, like I need to make this full commitment to applying to med school, knowing full and well what I'm getting myself into. Yet, knowing that this is a branch in the road. If I go down one path, I have, already a set stable career. Like what was that a tough decision, and what factors should people consider when wanting to make that time and, I don't want to undermine this, but also monetary commitment to going to med school.
Oh, absolutely. It's a very interesting decision, especially from a pharmacist perspective, because historically speaking, it's a pretty high paying specialty when it comes to like a comparison to maybe like a national average. I think like the most recent data averages around 120 grand a year starting. So it's pretty good. And so making that financial decision off the bat is definitely challenging. Here I am still in medical school and I look over at my peers who I graduated with and they're, buying cars and starting families. And I'm just, sitting there thinking about it, but I know it'll be worth it in the end. So definitely finance is a major consideration. Also, pharmacy school is expensive. So I have, graduate level loans. Grad Plus I knew about Grad Plus before I even started med school. So I guess I'm very familiar with that policy and that platform. So, I have extra pharmacy loans on top of my medical school loans. So that's also another factor. So delayed, income, or I guess lost opportunity cost pharmacy income on top of additional loans, like you said. But at the end of the day, I think the most important thing is, you got to do what you're passionate about. So I knew that I would be happy being a physician. And so all of those factors kind of fell to the wayside. And, from a financial perspective, like if you're, dedicated and you're working a lot as a physician, I think I'll be able to recoup some of those costs down the line. But yeah, it's definitely something that you have to consider as a pharmacy student who's like, wanting to make that transition. You have to worry about prerequisites because not everything transfers appropriately either. So there's a lot of little things that you have to kind of factor in. But I think it really starts with just where do you want your career to be? Where are you not going to burn out in, 10 years from now? Like if I was a clinical pharmacist, I don't know if I would be able to stay in the profession for 10 plus years. And then, at the end of the line, I'd be sitting there thinking like, wow, I really wish I went to med school. I really wish I gave it a shot.
Yeah, that's great words of advice. Again, like I think that longevity is a super important consideration. I I am curious though, what if there were other factors in here, and I'm speaking more of a theoretical for other people who may be in this situation. Would your decision have changed if you had, a full-on family, a couple kids, and like you had kind of a settled down, I think more secured and flushed out life as a pharmacist? Would you still have made that decision?
Yeah, that's definitely a tough decision. And I think it probably needs to be individualized to every single person. But generally speaking, I think that, obviously if you have a house, then you're going to have to worry about mortgage payments and things along those lines. So making that transition might be good for you personally, but might not be good for your family. And if people are dependent on you, then, that certainly changes the whole dynamic of how things work. If you have a family and you have kids and stuff. But certainly, if your family's really supportive of that transition, then I think they should encourage you to kind of chase your dreams and go for it. The finances, like I said, will work itself out at the end of everything. So, that I guess that's what I keep telling myself as I see my loan pile, go past 300,000. And I'm just like, oh, that hurts. But
Yeah, it's a scary large red number.
it's just fake money. It's all monopoly, right?
And if that's what you're telling yourself, I'll be sleeping at night. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I know I'm
We
going
all
to
have
regret
our
saying
ways.
that. In the 10 years from now, I'll be sitting there thinking like, oh man, this sucks. Paying it
No,
off. But
I think like it's definitely possible to keep that up and like obviously pay it all off. There's tons of good plans for residency. I have a podcast with Dr. Cellini kind of talking
yeah.
about options for a lot of physicians once they get out of residency of those public service loan forgiveness plans and everything.
Mhm.
There are ways to do it, and I think like that theoretical kind of brings me to my next question because you did mention you had some mentorship and some guidance from other pharmacists or even possibly non-physician healthcare professionals who have made that transition to med school. So one, how was that mentorship and how important was it in your decision? But also two, were there some of those mentors who were in that theoretical position of having really that full career and that practicing stability before going to med school?
Yeah. So, I mean, like I've said, mentors are obviously huge. And this just goes for any profession you go into. They kind of, seed you. Like I had an interest in medical school, but I didn't know where to start. I didn't really know where to take things to the next step. And so, listening to someone who's kind of been through that process already makes a huge difference when it comes to the outcomes of, your endeavors. And so they were just really, really influential in my whole experience. And the first individual was a pharmacy student who is in the class above me. And she had a mentor who was a resident at the time, who went to pharmacy school beforehand. And he kind of served as like the beacon of all knowledge when it came to, non-traditional applicants. And so we kind of like latched onto him, and he, gave us some shadowing experience, like in very clinical settings, like in the ER and all that stuff. And, as a pharmacy student who was used to community pharmacy, and that was basically the first time I'd ever seen anything like that. And I was just amazed. So they kind of introduced the ideas, and then I kind of ran with what they provided me. So I don't think I would be where I am today without their insight and their, dedication to my success. But for them personally, dating back to like what made them make that transition, I think it was very similar. Most of them didn't have a family life at that particular time, but the one individual I know for sure, was so passionate about infectious disease that he, like, nothing else mattered. He needed to become an infectious disease doctor, and he did it. So now he's currently attending down in Pittsburgh, but it's just very, I guess, rewarding experience. Like, he knew from the start, like when he was born, he was like, I'm going to be a pharmacist, learn all this stuff, and then I'm going to go and become a physician, and I'm going to combine these two degrees and, use all that clinical knowledge.
Infectious disease is quite the specialty to be that passionate about.
It's pretty cerebral for sure.
Yeah, I've heard from some of my friends that they have the longest rounds of probably anybody in the hospital.
Just going over cephalosporins all day long. It sounds great.
And that's where the pharmacy background is really, really helpful. But I think also, where would you advise people to look for kind of that mentorship, knowing that it was so important for you?
Yeah, so obviously, look around to see if there's any other, non-traditional. You can obviously find anyone who's gone to medical school. So finding a physician would just be, huge, but they might not have the same perspective that you need, especially as a non-traditional applicant. And this doesn't just apply to pharmacy. It could be, anyone like nurses or PAs who decide to go, obviously, to medical school. So find someone who's made that similar transition. You could just do a simple Google search to find it. Alternatively, like, part of the reason, I guess, why like I'm even building a business or doing all this stuff is because of that mentorship that I had. And I wanted to basically give back to others online. And that's kind of the reason why I started all of this and the physician pharmacist in the first place, was to kind of formalize that material to make it a little bit more accessible for non-traditional applicants to apply. So that's, I guess I would recommend, obviously searching your local area, finding people that have gone down that pathway ahead of time, and also, checking online resources and see what other people have done it, because it's certainly been done before. And then I guess like lastly would be like checking out, the content that's available and resources available.
Definitely awesome advice. Again, like, just a small plug, so Nathan doesn't have to do it himself. You do have a pretty good setup, and links will all be in the description for this, to deliver some of that mentorship to students kind of in your unique situation. Oh, if you are listening and this story is starting to sound a lot like you, definitely check out the links below. But kind of moving right along, because knowing that you probably don't want to do infectious disease, but there are definitely still some parallels of how your background in pharmacy can help you as a medical student and a future physician. So I think, besides the obvious of, oh, okay, you have a better understanding of the pharm and the medications we use, what are some ways your experiences as a pharmacist have prepared you to become a better applicant to med school first, and then two, even prepare you to be a better future physician that you may not have even expected?
Yeah, that's definitely a great question. So I guess we'll start with the first one, like, how did it prepare me for like medical school applications and whatnot? So, one of the big things I think that helped a lot with my application was the ample clinical exposure. I think a lot of, traditional applicants will get, a couple shadowing hours here and there, or they'll shadow one physician, a couple times, jump around, or maybe get like very small patient exposures. And I'm generalizing. That's, it's not for everyone, but, but comparatively, pharmacy kind of has all of that early exposure built in. So I had tons of clinical experience. I was very comfortable being in the hospital, being a member of the team. So I would like on my clinical rotations, and this came in helpful, especially during interviews, medical school interviews, because I was currently on clinical rotations. So I would, round with the team, make recommendations. And then the next day I'd be going to an interview and I'd be sitting across from a physician. And it just felt very, very natural during that time period. And so some of my interviews, we only talked, they said, "Oh, you're a pharmacist? Tell me about this medication." Or let's talk about, how we handle things on the floor. And then we just have a full out peer-to-peer discussion versus maybe that traditional like interviewer and then the interviewee is very nervous sitting there. So I think that went a long way with the exposure. Because of course, like medical school applications, they don't focus a whole ton on maybe like your clinical knowledge. That's more just tested objectively through like the MCAT or something along those lines. But yeah, so I think when it came to just like having that comfort level during interviews was really important. The PharmD definitely, they see that on paper and they ask about it every single time. So it draws a lot of attention too. So I think that helps quite a bit. And just like I said, that the general professionalism, because pharmacy school was a 6-year process for me, I think there was a lot more maturity coming out of that process of being through, like getting through graduate school at that time, that maybe some traditional applicants who only do, 2, I guess 4 years of just undergrad and go right through might not have that kind of life experience at that time. So I think that definitely was a major feature for applying to medical school. And then, throughout school, obviously, this is where we shift more into that clinical knowledge, using that pharmacy background, blending all of that experience and using it when you're on your rounds. It didn't help so much. It helped with like, testing during didactic portions, but it's certainly been way more helpful with clinical rotations. When I see a medication, I can see a dose now, and I can, recognize that this is way too high of a dose. That's toxic, or things along those lines. Or this is the hallmark side effect of this, rare medication that people have to look up. So I think that's definitely been, helpful as well throughout my experience. Hopefully it's helpful for residency too, but we're still we have to tackle that beast.
For sure. Were you very popular on your internal medicine rotation?
So unfortunately, I haven't had internal medicine yet. So I have that coming up,
Really?
and I'm very excited for it because I know that's like probably the most. Pharmacy translates the most into that particular like subspecialty and things that kind of branch from that. So I've been on pretty much surgery for the whole 6 months that I've been on rotations and whatnot. So I haven't been able to use it as much as I would hope for, but I'm looking forward to internal med in the coming weeks.
Yeah, I was gonna say like all the things that you're saying that are gonna be super useful, like it is by far like the the best place to use that knowledge is on internal medicine rounds, and the stuff that you were saying that you have like knowledge of, the residents don't even have. So like the fact that you can be the med student kind of like, hey, like I don't think we should push the dose of this higher, is gonna be huge, and of course it's gonna lend yourself to great letters of rec. You're gonna do great on that rotation in general. But like that's just really cool to see because it's unique. You're integrating this knowledge, and I think I don't know, maybe getting a sneak peek to what you want to do for residency. What are you thinking of pursuing specialty wise, and has your background in pharmacy kind of affected that decision?
Yeah, it certainly has. I think I certainly want to use my pharmacy background as much as possible. So I want to go into a specialty that utilizes a lot of it. So like I said, I haven't had internal medicine yet, so I can't say that I'm not going into internal med. However, I was really, really fascinated with anesthesia. So that kind of checks that box of having pharmacy background right there, as well as it has a lot more hands-on procedural stuff that I was interested in. So I think primarily right now, my number one is definitely anesthesia, and I'm planning on applying to that, but who knows, maybe internal medicine will kind of shift me away and I'll have to rethink a lot of things.
There's a reason why like say anesthesia is real time pharmacokinetics. Like, it's really cool.
Certainly gets down to like the basics. You have to calculate volumes distribution, or like just be conscientious of the medications you use and how it's going to affect individuals with different weights, and how long the anesthetic's going to take to kind of diffuse throughout the body, or come off. And then obviously the hands-on approach to like intubations, but I'm hoping to blend it more so with like a critical care component. So that will definitely utilize a lot more like of the pharmacy side of things too, when it comes to like medication selection and ICU care.
Yeah, anesthesia quick care is a fantastic route. We have a really good program here, so I'm like fairly familiar with it, and everything you're saying lines up. I definitely loved anesthesia for that regard. I didn't particularly enjoy the whole concept on internal medicine of like I'm gonna order a medication and then just like come back tomorrow and hope that it did what it's supposed to do. But I mean, you're pushing pressors in the OR, like literally watching vitals change in real time. I'm sure it gives you as someone with pharmacy background great joy to watch.
Yeah, the feedback, the instant gratification of like a medication intervention is it's fantastic. I can't emphasize it enough. You push a phenylephrine and see like all these great things happen. It's just like, wow, like look at that, I did that.
Exactly.
So it's good stuff.
Alrighty. Well, I got two more questions for you before we wrap things up. I think the first one is reflective, but I think it's just more for the people out there. Do you believe that this switch is worth it? I think the answer is pretty obvious based over the course of the conversation, but I'm sure that's kind of the baseline question people want to know.
Yeah, I definitely don't have any regrets with it. So 100%, it's worth it. But again, it needs to be individualized with your life experiences that you have. Do you have a family? Do you have other considerations that you need to factor in, especially financial ones? So those are definitely things that you have to sit down and ask yourself, what are my ultimate goals at the end of the day? Do I want to be a practicing physician? Do I want to have a better maybe work-life balance? And that might lean you towards pharmacy a little bit more, where you're able to kind of go to your job, you're not on call ever, and then you go home and you don't have to worry about it, versus something in medicine kind of is the exact opposite of that. So you have to sit there and think, where do I want to be in 10 years? What kind of life do I want to live financially? Like, does this match your financial goals when it comes to, do you want to get into real estate, or do you want to, be out of healthcare as a whole? So those are things you have to definitely factor in. But, for me, I think it was 100% the best decision I could have made. I don't have any regrets about it. Like I said, it hurts to see some of my friends driving their Teslas around, but, I know we'll have our time eventually.
Likewise with the pain. But alrighty, last question. What is the one advice you would give to the prospective medical student out there wanting to be in your shoes one day?
I guess the advice I would say is probably just, do your research. Do your research. If you want to go into a particular specialty, or want to, get into this position where I am, where you're in medical school, you've finished out pharmacy school, do your research and make sure that, like I said, everything lines up with where you want to be. You don't want to make any mistakes down the line to find out, oh, medicine actually is really hard, or the hours are really bad, or something along those lines. So, being well prepared when it comes to do it, I guess, like, doing your Google searches, talking to people, I think is going to be the biggest thing. So, find out where you can talk to people, because they're going to give you the real information that you need to hear. Sometimes it's not going to be some kind of salesy pitch or anything like that online, where you'll get like the full out, realistic response. Like, do they look tired? Are they happy with their disposition, and so on. So talk to people, do your research, I think is like going to be the biggest thing when it comes to, getting into medical school and, living the career that you want to be living.
Really, really great advice. And I'm really excited to kind of like kick off season 2 of this podcast with some awesome stories. Nathan, thank you so much for your time. For those wanting your personal mentorship, where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm pretty responsive on LinkedIn, so you can just find me on LinkedIn. You can type in my name, Nathan Gartland. Hopefully I'll show up. Yeah, so if you ever have any like questions or anything like that, definitely reach out in a direct message or add me, and I usually get back to you within like a day or two. Alternatively, you can check out my website, physicianpharmacist.com, and you can just see a bunch of blog answers about like making the transition or how to navigate the MCAT or things along those lines. A little more of the technical content. Alternatively, go and research all this stuff online, Student Doctor Network, and all those other places that have good resources available.
For sure. Thank you so much. Of course, you're class of 2024 as well. So best of luck in your step dedicated match process, et cetera, et cetera. I'm right there with you.
Yeah, best of luck with you too. I know you're going through a tough time right now, so I'm supporting you.
Thank you. And thanks for watching and listening. We'll catch you on the next one.